A young black girl filled the park with the beauty of her music, but a racist tried to shut her down. What happened next? The crowd's unforgettable stand against hate will leave you in awe. The sun hung low in the afternoon sky, casting a warm, golden glow over the park. Birds chirped in the trees, their melodies blending with the gentle rustle of the leaves in the breeze. Families laughed, children played, and couples strolled hand in hand along the winding paths. It was a scene of peace and harmony, the kind of day that made you believe in the simple beauty of life. In the middle of it all stood an old, upright piano. Its surface was scuffed, its keys worn, but there was something enchanting about it, an unspoken invitation for anyone brave enough to play. And then, she appeared. A young black girl, maybe 12 or 13, stepped forward, her small frame barely noticeable among the crowd. Her hair was neatly braided, and she wore a simple dress that fluttered slightly in the wind. She carried herself with a quiet confidence, as if she knew something magical was about to happen. Her fingers touched the keys hesitantly at first, testing the old piano's voice. A soft, sweet sound emerged, drawing the attention of those nearby. Slowly she began to play. A melody so rich and emotional, it seemed to wrap around everyone who listened. It wasn't just music, it was a story of hope, resilience, and dreams too big to be silenced. The crowd began to gather, their conversations fading into silence. Parents pulled their children closer, pointing to the girl with admiration. A jogger paused mid-stride. His curiosity piqued. Even the birds seemed to quiet down, as though the world itself wanted to hear her song. And she played as though nothing else existed, her eyes closed, her face serene. She poured every ounce of her soul into the music. To anyone watching, it was clear this wasn't just a girl at a piano. This was an artist speaking a language beyond words. But what most couldn't see, what made this moment all the more extraordinary, was what this music meant to her. Playing the piano was her escape, her sanctuary. At home, life wasn't easy. Money was tight, and her family struggled to make ends meet. But here, in this park, on this old piano, she wasn't just a girl trying to find her place in the world. She was unstoppable. Tears glistened in the eyes of some onlookers as the melody reached its peak. A crescendo so beautiful, it sent chills down their spines. It was as though she had captured the essence of every joy and sorrow in the human experience and set it free in the air. And then, just as the final notes began to fade, the peace of the moment was shattered. A voice cut through the harmony like a knife. Loud, harsh, cruel. "Hey, stop that racket!" The girl froze, her fingers hovering above the keys. The music silenced as quickly as it had begun. The crowd turned in unison, their collective gasp barely masking the words that followed. "This isn't your stage. Go play somewhere else." The man who had spoken stepped forward, his face twisted with disdain. His presence was jarring against the beauty of the moment, a stain on an otherwise perfect canvas. The girl's hands trembled as she pulled them away from the keys. She looked down, her confidence slipping away under the weight of his glare. The park fell silent, the tension so thick it was almost suffocating. But then, from the crowd, someone murmured, "No, this isn't right." The moment was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. The man who shouted stepped closer to the piano, his presence looming like a dark cloud over the girl. He was middle-aged, wearing a wrinkled shirt and a scowl that seemed permanently etched into his face. His voice carried an air of authority, the kind that expected obedience without question. "I said stop," he barked, pointing a finger at the girl. "This park isn't for street performers. You're disturbing the peace." The girl's hands clutched her lap, her gaze locked on the ground. The vibrant melody that had filled the park just moments ago now seemed like a distant memory. Her chest rose and fell quickly, the weight of humiliation settling over her. The crowd, once mesmerized by her music, now stood in stunned silence. Parents held their children close, whispering in disbelief. A young couple exchanged a worried glance, unsure of whether to intervene. But no one moved. Not yet. The man's voice grew louder, his words dripping with contempt. "You people think you can just show up anywhere, don't you? Taking up space where you don't belong." His words cut through the air like shards of glass. The girl flinched, shrinking further into herself. But as the man continued, something began to shift in the crowd. Faces that had been filled with awe and joy moments earlier now hardened with anger. Whispers grew louder. "She's just a kid," someone said under their breath. "That's not right," murmured another. Finally, a woman in her late 40s, wearing a floral sundress and holding a small dog, stepped forward. Her voice was calm but firm, a quiet strength laced with every word. "Sir, that's enough. She wasn't hurting anyone." The man whipped around, glaring at the woman. "This has nothing to do with you," he snapped. "She doesn't belong here." The woman didn't flinch. "Actually, this has everything to do with all of us. That music was beautiful, and you had no right to stop her." More voices began to chime in, a ripple of defiance spreading through the crowd. "She wasn't disturbing the peace." "You are. Leave her alone. She's just a kid trying to play music." The man's confidence began to falter as the crowd closed ranks around the piano. A jogger who had paused earlier stepped forward, standing beside the woman in the sundress. "She's got every right to be here. Same as you. If you don't like it, maybe you should leave." The man's face turned red, his fists clenching at his sides. "You're all ridiculous," he spat, his voice cracking with frustration. "This is a public park, not some concert hall." "And that's exactly the point," the jogger replied, his voice rising. "It's public, which means it's for everyone, including her." The girl sat frozen on the bench, her eyes darting between the man and the growing crowd of supporters. For a moment she felt invisible again, like she was watching this unfold from a distance. But then, someone knelt beside her. It was an older black woman, her silver hair tucked neatly under a wide-brimmed hat. She placed a gentle hand on the girl's shoulder, her eyes full of warmth and reassurance. "Don't let him take your voice away, baby," she said softly. "You were given a gift. Don't let anyone make you feel like you don't deserve to share it." Tears pricked the girl's eyes, and she nodded ever so slightly. The crowd had fully turned against the man now, their voices rising in unity. "Apologize to her," someone shouted. "Let her play," yelled another. The man looked around, realizing he was outnumbered. His bravado crumbled under the weight of the crowd's indignation. Muttering something under his breath, he turned and stormed off, his footsteps heavy and hurried. A collective sigh of relief swept through the park. The tension that had gripped the air began to dissipate, replaced by something lighter, something hopeful. The girl stared after the man, her hands still trembling. But before she could fully process what had happened, a voice rang out from the crowd. "Play something else." It was the jogger, his tone encouraging, almost pleading. "Don't let him stop you." "Yeah, play for us," said a young mother holding her toddler. More voices joined in, a chorus of support building around her. The girl hesitated, her fingers hovering over the keys once more. Her heart pounded in her chest. Could she do it? Could she find the strength to play again after what had just happened? The older woman beside her gave her shoulder a gentle squeeze. "You've got this, sweetheart. We're all here for you." The girl closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and let her hands fall onto the keys. This time, the first note wasn't hesitant. It was bold, filled with a quiet defiance that spoke louder than words. The melody she played wasn't the same as before. It was deeper, richer, infused with the weight of what she had just endured, and as the music rose, so did the crowd's spirit. The park was no longer the quiet, serene escape it had been just moments before. It had transformed into something powerful, something alive. As the young girl's fingers danced across the piano keys, the melody she played carried a raw and unspoken message. Strength in the face of hatred, resilience in the face of cruelty. The crowd stood mesmerized, their silence now one of reverence. Her music seemed to echo the emotions they all felt. Anger at the injustice they'd witnessed, awe at her courage to play again, and hope that this moment could be something greater than the cruelty that had tried to stop her. A woman holding her toddler swayed gently to the music, her face soft with admiration. A teenage boy in a hoodie, who had been scrolling on his phone earlier, now stood still, his hands in his pockets, his eyes fixed on the girl as though he were seeing something he didn't fully understand, but deeply felt. The older black woman who had encouraged the girl earlier stood by her side, her face glowing with pride. She clapped softly in time with the rhythm, as if to say, "Keep going, baby, you're unstoppable." And then, as the girl's song reached its first crescendo, something unexpected happened. A young boy, no older than 6 or 7, stepped forward from the crowd. He wore a red baseball cap and clutched a small tambourine in his hands. Without saying a word, he began to shake it gently, matching the beat of the piano. The girl glanced at him, her nervousness flickering for just a moment. But when she saw his wide, innocent smile, something in her steadied. She nodded slightly, as if inviting him to join her. The crowd began to hum along softly, their voices weaving into the music like a warm embrace. It wasn't perfect. Some voices were out of tune, others too loud. But it didn't matter. The imperfections made it real, raw, and deeply human. Then a man in his 30s, carrying a worn guitar strapped to his back, stepped forward. "Mind if I join in?" he asked, his voice loud enough to carry but gentle enough not to startle her. The girl nodded again, her fingers continuing to pour out the melody. He quickly tuned his guitar and began to strum along, filling the air with a rich harmony. The music grew fuller, bolder, a collaboration born from the raw energy of the moment. And just like that, the park became a symphony. Children clapped their hands, couples swayed together, and people who had never met before sang in unison. What had started as a single piano melody had grown into a collective act of unity and defiance against hate. The young girl no longer seemed small or uncertain. She sat tall on the piano bench, her back straight, her face serene. With every note, she reclaimed her voice, her space, and her dignity. She was no longer just a girl playing piano in the park. She was a beacon, reminding everyone of the power of standing together. Meanwhile, on the outskirts of the crowd, the man who had tried to stop her stood watching. His face was unreadable, but his fists were clenched tightly at his sides. He shifted uncomfortably, his earlier confidence now replaced with something resembling shame. A teenage boy nearby turned to him and said bluntly, "Still think she doesn't belong here?" The man didn't respond. Instead, he shoved his hands into his pockets and slinked away, his head low as he disappeared down the path. The crowd didn't notice him leave. They were too caught up in the magic of the moment. The music rose higher, more joyful, as though it was celebrating his departure. As the girl's song came to a gentle close, the final notes hanging in the air like a whisper, the crowd erupted into applause. Cheers and whistles filled the park, the sound echoing off the trees. The girl sat frozen for a moment, her hands still on the keys, her chest rising and falling as she took it all in. Tears welled in her eyes. But this time they weren't tears of fear or shame. They were tears of gratitude. The older black woman leaned down and whispered, "See? They didn't just hear your music, they felt it. And that's something no one can ever take away from you." The girl looked up at the crowd, and for the first time that day, she smiled. It wasn't a big, bold smile. It was small, soft, and filled with the kind of quiet strength that could move mountains. From somewhere in the back, someone shouted, "Encore!" The girl laughed, the sound breaking through the remaining tension in the air. She wiped her eyes, placed her fingers back on the keys, and began to play again. This time, a lighter, more joyful tune. And just like that, the park came alive once more. Not as a place of conflict, but as a place of connection, healing, and hope. The second song she played was brighter, livelier, a complete departure from the emotional depth of the first. It was as though she was saying, "I've survived, and I'm still here." Her fingers moved across the keys with newfound confidence, every note a statement of resilience. The crowd clapped along to the rhythm, their faces lighting up with joy. Strangers who had never spoken before turned to each other with smiles and knowing nods, united by the shared experience of witnessing something extraordinary. A young woman in a wheelchair, sitting near the back of the crowd, wiped tears from her eyes and leaned toward her husband. "This is what the world needs more of," she whispered. "Courage. Grace. People like her." The older black woman remained by the girl's side, clapping softly, her expression filled with pride. She occasionally whispered words of encouragement. "That's it, baby. Show them who you are." Nearby, the man with the guitar added layers to her music, improvising harmonies that made the performance feel like a full concert. The boy with the tambourine continued to shake it enthusiastically, his energy infecting everyone around him. A small group of children began to dance in front of the piano, their giggles filling the air. Then, as if on cue, someone in the crowd began recording on their phone. Others followed, capturing the moment to share with the world. The music wasn't just reaching those in the park anymore. It was about to spread far and wide. At the edge of the park, an older white man leaned against a tree, watching the girl intently. He'd been there from the beginning, silent through the confrontation and the aftermath. His face was hard to read, equal parts curiosity and something deeper, perhaps regret. Next to him, a middle-aged man who had been cheering for the girl earlier turned and noticed the bystander. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said, his voice warm and inviting. The older man hesitated, then nodded. "She's got talent, no doubt about it," he muttered. The middle-aged man, sensing an opening, added, "It's more than talent, it's courage. After what just happened, it takes guts to keep playing like that." The older man shifted uncomfortably, his gaze dropping to the ground. Maybe I was wrong," he said quietly, almost to himself. The middle-aged man smiled faintly, sensing the beginnings of change. "We all get it wrong sometimes," he said. "But what matters is what we do next." The older man didn't respond, but he stayed rooted to the spot, watching the performance to the very end. As the second song ended, the girl paused, her hands resting lightly on the keys. The crowd burst into another round of applause, louder than before. She turned slightly to look at the older black woman, who gave her a reassuring nod. "You've got one more in you, don't you?" the woman said with a smile. The girl nodded shyly, her confidence growing with every passing moment. "One more," she whispered, almost to herself. This time she played a song that was slower, more reflective. It wasn't mournful, but it carried an air of gratitude, a way of saying thank you to the crowd that had stood by her, lifted her up, and reminded her of her own strength. As she played, people in the crowd began pulling out their wallets, dropping dollar bills and spare change into an open guitar case that someone had placed on the ground near the piano. It wasn't planned, but it happened naturally, a spontaneous gesture of support. When the song ended, the girl sat back, her hands falling to her lap as she looked out at the sea of smiling faces. For a moment, she was overwhelmed. The world hadn't always been kind to her. She'd faced prejudice and hardship that no child should have to endure. But in this moment, surrounded by people who believed in her, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The older woman leaned down again and whispered, "Look at them, baby. Look at what you did." You reminded them what love looks like. As the girl stood from the piano bench, a little boy ran up to her with a wide grin. "You were amazing," he said, holding out a small flower he had picked from the grass. The girl accepted it with a soft laugh, holding the delicate bloom close to her heart. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The guitar player handed her the guitar case, now filled with donations. "This is for you," he said. "Keep playing. Keep sharing your music with the world." Tears filled her eyes again as she looked down at the case, her heart full of gratitude. I didn't expect this," she said. A voice from the crowd called out, "You deserve it." The applause started again, this time mixed with cheers and whistles. People began stepping forward, offering words of encouragement. "Don't ever stop playing. Your music is a gift. You're going to go far, sweetheart." The girl looked around, her cheeks flushed, her heart pounding with emotion. She wanted to say something, but the words caught in her throat. Finally, she managed a simple, "Thank you. Thank you all so much." As the crowd slowly began to disperse, the girl stood by the piano for a moment, the flower still clutched in her hand. She looked up at the sky, the warmth of the sun on her face, and whispered to herself, "I belong here. I always have." The park began to empty, but the echoes of her music lingered in the air. People walked away, still talking about what they had witnessed, their voices full of awe and admiration. Some replayed the moment in their minds, the way she had overcome the cruelty of one man with the support of so many others. Among the crowd was a young woman, no older than 20, clutching her phone. She had recorded the entire scene from the confrontation to the triumphant encore. Her hands trembled as she uploaded the video to social media with the caption, "This young black girl just showed us all what strength looks like. Don't let hate win." Within hours, the video began to spread. The raw emotion of the moment, her talent, her courage, and the crowd's response captured hearts across the internet. Comments poured in. "I needed to see this today. What an inspiration. This girl's music is everything the world needs right now. Who is she? Someone find her so we can help her chase her dreams." By the next morning, the video had gone viral. News outlets picked up the story, dubbing her the piano girl of the park. Her performance became a symbol of resilience, a reminder that unity could overpower hate. 2 days after the incident, the girl sat at the small kitchen table in her family's apartment. The sunlight streaming through the window highlighted the faded wallpaper and mismatched chairs. Her mother, a tired but kind woman with calloused hands from long hours at work, placed a plate of toast in front of her. "You've been quiet since the park," her mother said gently, sitting down across from her. The girl looked up, her voice soft. I didn't think people would care." "But they did." Her mother reached out and took her hand. "They cared because you showed them something real. You reminded them of how powerful kindness can be." Just then there was a knock at the door. Her mother stood, wiping her hands on her apron before opening it. Standing on the other side was a tall man in a crisp suit, holding a briefcase and wearing a warm smile. "Good morning. My name is Marcus Taylor," he said. "I'm a representative for the local arts foundation. I hope I'm not intruding." The girl peeked around the corner, her curiosity piqued. "I saw the video of your daughter's performance at the park," Marcus continued. "It was extraordinary. We believe she has incredible potential, and our foundation would like to offer her a scholarship to attend our music academy." Her mother's hand flew to her mouth in shock. "Are you serious?" Marcus smiled. "Completely. We want to nurture her talent and give her the tools she needs to thrive. All expenses covered." The girl stepped forward cautiously, her heart pounding in her chest. "You really think I'm good enough for something like that?" she asked. Marcus knelt slightly to meet her gaze. "I don't just think it. I know it. The world needs to hear your music, and we want to help you share it." In the months that followed, her life began to change. She started attending the music academy, where she was given a piano to practice on, and mentors who helped her refine her craft. Every day, she grew more confident, her melodies becoming even more vibrant and soulful. But she never forgot the moment in the park, the people who had stood by her, the older black woman who had whispered encouragement, the boy with the tambourine who joined in without hesitation. One afternoon, after finishing a lesson, she returned to that same park. She sat at the old piano again, running her fingers over the worn keys, her heart swelling with gratitude. A small crowd began to gather, just like before. She smiled at them and said, "This was the place where it all started. I'm here today because people like you believed in me." She began to play, her music carrying a new depth and maturity. But this time she wasn't playing just for herself. She was playing for everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. She was playing for the boy with the tambourine, the older woman who had lifted her spirits, and the crowd that had stood against hate. And she was playing for the version of herself who had once been too afraid to keep going. As her final note faded into the air, the crowd erupted into applause. She stood and gave them a small bow, tears in her eyes. She realized then that her music had become more than just notes and melodies. It was a voice, a way to connect, to inspire, and to heal. And she knew deep down that this was only the beginning.